Back in the 60s, if an African American woman or male was put into a position, a higher position of authority, that was a big deal. It was seen as a big deal from the optics standpoint that this person who was reviled, who went through centuries of being shown and presented images of themselves as being lesser than, of being inferior, incapable of doing the specific job of leading. I mean, even Doug Williams, the quarterback for the Washington Redskins, it was wondered whether a black quarterback could exist, as if his race has something to do with stopping him from playing that game at that level. It's ludicrous, and yet the racial stuff is not necessarily out of common sense. It's often out of this kind of weird ideology. In the very specific case, though, that we're talking about, if a black person was put into a position of authority or put in a position high up, it was going beyond whatever they were doing in the position in their office. There was a political reasoning behind it. And that political reasoning on some level got across that, hey, these people are competent, these people can do the job that we're assigning them to do. And it would often take somebody who was white to actually put that black person in that particular position of authority. Now, I'm talking specifically politics. And the reason why I'm saying this specifically politics, because I kind of want to show that the shiny object thing wasn't bad in the 60s. It was necessary in the 60s. And yeah, it also showed that the person who was of a color was competent and capable of doing the job that they were put in to do, whatever that job is. Now, fast forward 30, 40 years, and you still have a shiny object item that takes place. Now, it's one thing when the main prevailing politics was color. Meaning you put a person in a particular office and the person is African American and the color of that person matters in capacity to what they're doing and in the optics of what they're doing. Fast forward 40 years, is that still true? Meaning think of the number of African Americans that are running their businesses. Think of the number of African Americans that are in business. Hell, we had a black president already. So anything below that point is going to be, of lesser value. And didn't just have a black president that was barely making it. He wasn't a C student. He was, a Harvard Review. He was the top of the line, the epitome from the standpoint of education. That's what it took for a black person to get into office. And from the standpoint of others, look, the point that I'm making here is putting person in the position has been a shiny object issue for a very long time. And in the 60s, where you could justify it, even say it was needed. And back when you get to 2000, they're putting people in positions, not for the optics in the sense of real world phenomena and real world things being done, but more so just for the optics and to eschew economic realities. Meaning we're going to fill the room up by talking with identity and the economics of the whole thing. We're not going to necessarily bring that up, despite the fact that the economics is the part that needs to be brought up. And the longer and the farther you go into the future, the less connected the racial issue is. Meaning in the 60s, you put somebody who was black, that person might have been very focused on the issue of race and how that issue of race plays into the mechanics of their life. When you get 40 years in and you put the shiny object in, that person is just a Democrat. Yes, they may be black, but beyond being black, they are just a Democrat. The notion of class and that dynamic no longer plays a role in regards to that particular person being put in that office. Putting somebody in who's black is just putting somebody in who has a different color distinction. It's not changing the material conditions of the job or the position. That needs to be drilled in and that needs to be understood. Me putting a person in of color. The color is not an attribute that is functional or active at this point. It's only an attribute to be used as a prop. So when I hear people say, are you going to put a black person into this position or a black person into that position? My thought is always, what does that person being black have to do with their capabilities and to do the job? And if you are putting in a certain person in a position, shouldn't the thing that you care about is less about the content of their skin color, but more so about the content of their character and whether or not they can do the job from a standpoint of policy? If you can hit both, great. I have no issue with you putting an African American in. I would even go so far as to say doing so adds an extra level of oomph to that particular position, considering what African Americans endured in this country. And when I make the point that in the 60s, the signing object thing is necessary, it's because the environment changes. The environment that you had in the 60s with African Americans is different than the environment that you have now, especially from the standpoint of the space that they could talk and engage in the politics of it all. From the standpoint of the capitalistic system, though, it is not a negative to expand the number of people that have the money and the capabilities of buying your products. Meaning, if you're going to put blacks or Hispanics or somebody else in a position where they are marginalized regarding cash and marginalized to the outskirts of that society, then you, on some level, may be taking a pay cut in your jobs and in the products that you're selling. My point is, civil rights wasn't as much of a lift as, let's say, environmental rights, because at the end of the day, as difficult as civil rights was to get over, I mean, for fuck's sake, we're talking about the 400 years and still going. It didn't adversely affect wallets in the same way that trying to marginalize oil and gas affects wallets. I'm making the point that we're at the point that we need to get past the shiny object stage of politics. It doesn't do us any service, any goods. You have Joe Biden and these other Democrats coming out saying, hey, I know you black people need health care, and I know you black people want education, because not only does it cut down on the income gap, but it also frees you up. It gives you this notion of an ability to kind of function in your society and do what you want to do without the burden of $20, $30, $40, $50,000 of debt on your back. Meaning, I get that the people at the bottom end of the income scale will be positively affected by me either eliminating school debt and or passing a Medicare for all plan, or for that matter, staying with the diminutive public option. But instead, I'm going to give you Kamala Harris. I'm not going to give you the $15 an hour minimum wage. I'm going to give you Kamala Harris. She's black. She's a woman. You should be happy about that. And it's that. And that's not something that blacks should be happy about, considering they need health care and the education. I hope you get what I mean. Throwing Kamala in and her identity in lieu of actually passing policy, I guarantee you the people would prefer the policy. And what you end up getting, however, is the optics of this black woman, this Hispanic woman, this woman missing a leg, this woman missing an arm, this woman that's a hermaphrodite. Whatever the person is, you get this kind of weird policy thing where the identity of the person matters more than the policies and what they're doing in their office. And yet, they're sold to you as, look at this black person taking a position, as if their race and their color give some context as to what they're going to do in their office. I'm saying it doesn't, and I'm saying we need to stop acting like it does. That's my point. What inspired this thought was this. Joy Ann Reid is talking to Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, Governor Gavin Newsom has a recall effort against him. He's had several, and he's been fighting them off. But in this very specific case, he's asked about Dianne Feinstein. If Senator Feinstein calls it a day, she's almost 80 years old, would you replace her with a black woman? The distinguishing characteristic, of course, is black. And again, I make the point that I have no idea how black translates into political policy outside of these people just being Democrats. Let's play the clip.
Okay, we are out of time. I have to go to a break, but I have to. This is a yes or no answer that you could give me. If in fact Dianne Feinstein were to retire, will you nominate an African American woman to restore the seat that Kamala Harris is no longer in the United States Senate? And do you have a name in mind?
I have multiple names in mind. We have multiple names in mind, and the answer is yes.
Okay, Governor Gavin Newsom.
He's probably ecstatic about that answer. And I listen to that answer thinking, so what? And again, I make the point, I don't want to be so callous as to say I don't care about a black woman being put into this position or that position. All things being equal, I do want people of color to be included into the government, and I want them to be part of the community. Why wouldn't I want them to be that? I'm just making the point that it is problematic. She looks at this and she's like, yes, a black woman is going to be in. But what are you getting out of that? Like, honestly, engage that. In the 60s, I got it. I totally get what you were getting out of it. In the 70s, I get it. In the 80s, I get it. And you have this momentum over time where you get to like the 60s, 70s, and 80s before there's even an allowance of a trickle of African Americans into positions of authority or positions that they can be of wealth where they can maintain their own. And I get there was a Reconstruction, but there was a backlash against the Reconstruction. And we're talking about this kind of momentum that went forward going into the 70s and 80s. But in this very specific case, what is she getting out of this? What is the thing that she says, yes, a black woman is going to be in it? Does she believe that those are more interviews? Does she believe she's going to get some kind of political power because that black woman is in? What does she think she's going to get out of that black woman being there? Or is it just, she looks like me, so I'm excited by that? I don't know. What I care about is the policy. I don't care if this, whoever it is, what I care about is whether the person is going to push for Medicare for all, whether the person is going to push for a Green New Deal, whether the person is going to push to eliminate all student debt and private and free college and universities. Is that person going to push for a $15 minimum wage? What I care about, what the American public care about, and if I may be so bold, what most blacks in the public care about. If you ask them, would you prefer Medicare for all and elimination of student debt and the expansion of Social Security, or would you prefer Kamala Harris or a random black woman to replace Dianne Feinstein? I'm telling you, the Medicare for all, the elimination of student debt, meaning the things that materially benefit the population, would be the things that win out, not the optics. There's a big dramatic difference between those two things. And so, yeah, I find it slightly disturbing when the question is asked in the framing of, hey, you're going to choose somebody black? And he's like, yes. And my thought is, does policy play a role in this at all? Yes. Then why didn't you say that in the beginning? Because that seems to be the primary thing in regards to a governmental device, not the optics from the standpoint of the color of their skin, but whether or not they can do the job, whether or not their policy qualifications run in line with something that the American public needs. Those are the things. That is the thing that is the most important. If you want to add race onto it, on top of it, fine, that's gravy on top. But the primary is the position. And until that gets to be this kind of ingrained, understood thing, race will continue to be this kind of weird issue in our country. Like, the person who gets this job should have got this job because their capabilities was on point for that job. And he may still choose somebody whose capabilities are on point for the job, but he make it a point that his stated objective was race, first and foremost. And in that, if he would have told her, look, within the context of what we're looking for the job, yes, a black woman will be perfectly eligible on our list of people to potentially get. I don't like that answer. That's all. Like I said, it's not about having a black woman in a position. I'm totally on board for that. It's just that race being the primary driver when there are all sorts of other items. I mean, you could get a black person and that person is far to the right. I mean, Obama, regardless of what he was saying, he made the point himself that he would be considered a conservative or a moderate Republican going back just a few years prior. It's not about race. It plays a role. It's about class. Don't forget that. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.